We're turning that page. This is the dawn of a new era, the era of Europe's full energy independence from Russia.
Move that looks set to turn off the tap on Russian gas forever, praised by the European Commission president.
Leaders held those talks focusing on energy, trade, and technology. More than 20 agreements were signed after both men praised their close ties. Later today, they're going to sit down over tea to discuss geopolitical matters like Ukraine, Iran, and the U.S.
And President Putin, meantime, says Russia's relationship with Beijing has reached what he calls an unprecedented high level.
On September 2nd of 2025, in a conference room in Beijing, two men signed a document that quietly redrew the map of global energy for the next 3 decades. One of them was Vladimir Putin. The other was Xi Jinping. The document was a legally binding agreement to build a 50 billion cubic meter per year natural gas pipeline running from the Yamal fields of western Siberia through Mongolia into the heart of China for 30 straight years. The project is called Power of Siberia 2. Gazprom's CEO Alexei Miller stood in front of cameras and called it the most ambitious and capital-intensive gas project in the history of the global industry. Combine that pipeline with the existing Power of Siberia 1, the Far Eastern route already under construction, and 20-year Arctic LNG supply contracts signed back in 2021. And you are looking at something close to 40 years of locked-in Russian gas flowing east, while Europe is voting itself out of the same market, while Brussels was finalizing legislation to ban every cubic meter of Russian gas from the EU by 2027. While European energy ministers were giving speeches about independence, Moscow was signing the largest gas supply deal of the 21st century with the one customer Europe cannot replace. That gap between what Europe just walked away from and what China just walked into is what this video is about. By the end, you will see exactly why this deal terrifies European policymakers more than they are willing to admit in public, and why the people who actually run global energy markets believe the next 30 years of the gas trade have already been decided. Hit subscribe and let's get into it. To understand the scale of what just happened, you have to understand where Europe started. Before February 2022, Russia was Europe's energy lifeline. Not a backup, not a supplement, the lifeline. Roughly 45% of all natural gas consumed in the European Union came from Russia. The big pipelines, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, the Yamal Europe line, the Turk Stream system, all of them poured Russian gas into German power plants, French factories, Italian heating systems, Polish steel mills, Dutch chemical complexes. Russian gas was cheap, it was abundant. It was the foundation that European industry was built on for 40 years. And then Putin invaded Ukraine. And in the span of 3 years, that entire arrangement was torn apart. The European Union responded with the most aggressive energy sanctions in modern history. Nord Stream was sabotaged and never returned to service. Pipeline volumes collapsed. Spot purchases of Russian LNG were restricted, and in January of 2026, after years of debate, the EU formally adopted regulation banning every form of Russian gas import. Short-term LNG contracts banned by April 2026. Long-term LNG contracts banned by January 2027. All pipeline gas banned by September 2027. The numbers tell you exactly how serious Brussels is. Penalties for non-compliance reach 40 million euros per company, or 3.5% of total worldwide annual turnover. This is not a polite request. This is a permanent legal seal. Russian gas share of EU imports fell from 45% before the war to 13% by 2025. By the end of 2027, it will be zero. Roughly 150 billion cubic meters of annual Russian gas demand will have been wiped off the European map in less than 6 years. That is a market collapse of historic scale. And here's the question every energy analyst on Earth was asking in 2024. What happens to all that gas? Russia does not have the option to stop producing. The Yamal fields, the Gaidan Peninsula, the entire Arctic exploration apparatus, all of it was built over decades to feed European demand. The wells exist, the fields are flowing, the infrastructure is sunk cost. So where does 150 billion cubic meters of redirected gas go? The answer arrived in Beijing on September 2nd, 2025. And it was not the answer Europe wanted to hear. Now picture the room. Putin had flown to Beijing for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and the 80th anniversary parade marking the end of World War II in the Pacific. Xi Jinping was hosting. They sat together for hours of meetings, and when Alexei Miller emerged afterward, he had a stack of 4 signed agreements with the China National Petroleum Corporation. The headline deal was Power of Siberia 2, a 50 billion cubic meter per year pipeline running from western Siberia through Mongolia into northern China, operating for 30 years. The biggest gas project anyone on Earth has ever attempted to build. The second deal increased flows through the existing Power of Siberia 1 pipeline from 38 to 44 billion cubic meters per year. The third boosted volumes through the Far Eastern route, set to begin operating in 2027. Together, these 3 pipelines alone will deliver up to 106 billion cubic meters of Russian gas to China every single year. That is roughly 2/3 of everything Russia used to export to Europe before the war. Redirected, locked in, heading east instead of west. And the LNG side of the story is even more interesting, because while Europe was tightening sanctions on Russian liquefied natural gas, China was quietly absorbing it. The Yamal LNG project, operational since 2017, has been shipping cargoes to Chinese ports throughout 2024 and 2025. The Arctic LNG 2 project, hit with American sanctions in 2023 and supposedly dead on arrival, instead pivoted entirely. By early 2026, Russian Arctic LNG 2 cargoes were arriving at China's Beihai terminal in volumes that exceeded 1 million tons in 2025 alone, routed through a decentralized shadow fleet of tankers, many of them with their location tracking systems deliberately switched off. Sanctions did not kill Arctic LNG 2. Sanctions just changed who was buying. Chinese companies already hold a combined 30% stake in Yamal LNG and 20% stake in Arctic LNG 2. 20-year supply agreements signed back in 2021 with Chinese buyers like Zhejiang Energy ensure that the entire Arctic gas operation has a customer base that does not depend on a single European purchase. Stack it all together, the pipelines, the Arctic LNG flows, the equity stakes, the 20-year supply contracts, the new 30-year Power of Siberia 2 deal. And what you are looking at is a Russia-China energy partnership stretching at minimum 3 decades into the future, supplying enough gas to replace the bulk of what Europe used to consume, owned and structured in ways that no Western sanction can easily unwind. The headlines call this a 30-year deal. The reality is closer to 40 years of overlapping commitments, locked in across pipelines, terminals, equity, and supply contracts that will outlast every European leader currently in office. And here's the part that has European policymakers genuinely worried. Because what Putin gave up at the negotiating table to make this happen was not small. To get China to sign Power of Siberia 2, Russia had to accept terms that almost no other gas exporter on Earth would accept. The price will reportedly be lower than what Gazprom charges European customers and significantly lower than market spot rates. Chinese negotiators reportedly demanded prices close to Russia's domestic rate, which sits around $120 to $130 per thousand cubic meters. Russian energy analysts have publicly admitted the new pipeline will generate a fraction of what Russia used to earn from selling the same gas to Europe. The annual revenue loss compared to the old European market is in the tens of billions of dollars. But Moscow accepted those terms anyway, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was watching Yamal gas flare off into the Arctic sky for the next 30 years with no customer to sell it to. Russia did not negotiate from strength in Beijing. Russia negotiated from desperation, and China knew it. This is the part Western analysts have been quietly admitting in their reports. Russia is becoming a permanent junior partner in a Chinese-dominated energy system. The discounts, the financing structures, the fact that Beijing is paying for the Chinese portion of the pipeline while Russia pays for its own section. The visa-free regime granted to Russian citizens entering China at the same summit. The shadow fleet of tankers operating outside international oversight. Every one of these details points the same direction. Russia is locked in, China sets the terms, and the asymmetry is not going to reverse. Now here is where honesty matters more than hype, because the situation, while severe for Europe, is not as binary as the title of this video suggests. EU gas reserves are not literally at zero. They are at roughly 90% of storage capacity heading into winter 2025 to 2026, which is healthy by historical standards. Europe has successfully diversified to American LNG, Qatari LNG, and Norwegian pipeline gas. And the bloc made it through 3 consecutive winters without major supply disruption. That is a real achievement. The Power of Siberia 2 deal itself still has open questions. The final price has not been published. Construction has not started. Mongolian transit terms remain partially unresolved. Russian state media has called it legally binding, but Chinese official sources have been notably quieter, leading some analysts to believe negotiations are still ongoing on critical commercial terms. And the Trump administration has added a new wrinkle to the European picture. The EU now imports roughly 56% of all its LNG from the United States, making Washington the dominant supplier of the energy that used to come from Moscow. European leaders are publicly nervous about replacing one dependency with another, especially after tensions over Greenland and trade earlier in 2026. The EU's plan from here is to push hard into offshore wind, nuclear, and domestic energy production. But none of that scales in the next 5 years. The transition is real. The transition will also be expensive. But step back from the qualifiers and look at what the September 2025 deal actually represents. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This was never just a pipeline deal. This was the formal closing of an era. For more than 50 years, Russian gas was the connective tissue between Russia and Europe. It was the reason German factories could compete globally. It was the reason Italian and French industrial policy worked. It was the leverage that allowed Moscow to play European capitals against each other for political concessions. And it was the single biggest source of foreign currency revenue funding the Russian state for 2 generations. On September 2nd, 2025, that 50-year arrangement was formally replaced with a different one. Russian gas now belongs to China. The leverage Moscow used to exert over Europe has been transferred to Beijing, but with one critical difference. Beijing is the buyer. Beijing sets the price. Beijing chooses the terms. And Russia, the country that built the most expensive Arctic gas infrastructure on Earth, specifically to serve European industrial demand, will spend the next 30 years selling that same gas at discounted prices to the one customer that has no obligation to treat it as a strategic partner. Europe got what it wanted: independence from Russian gas. The 2027 deadline will be met. The pipelines will be empty. The legal framework is final. But the cost was not just the price of replacing 150 billion cubic meters of annual supply. The cost was watching the largest gas reserve on Earth migrate permanently into the supply chain of Europe's single biggest economic competitor. The Russian energy lifeline that used to power European industry is now powering Chinese industry. And it will keep doing that until 2055. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what just happened in the global energy market, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss what we cover next on this channel. And here's the question I want to leave you with. If China spends the next 30 years buying Russian gas at discount prices while Europe pays premium rates for American LNG, who do you think comes out ahead in the long run? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.